Life inside America's harshest prison, ADX Florence explained. Subscribe before the door seals shut. Like this if you think you know what a supermax really is. Comment if you believe anyone deserves what happens inside. The convoy didn't stop when the sirens cut out. It didn't slow when the road climbed into the mountains. The vehicles moved with the patience of something designed to outlast panic, tires humming against asphalt that seemed to stretch forever. By the time the gates came into view, the sky had gone flat and pale, the kind of gray that erases shadows and makes distance feel unreal. That was when Daniel Mercer understood he had made a mistake. ADX Florence rose from the Colorado high desert like a fortress that had forgotten why it was built. Low, wide, and silent. No visible movement. No shouting. No lines of men waiting to be counted. Just concrete, steel, and the promise that once you went in, the world would narrow to the size of a room. Mercer had spent the last 9 years in federal custody. He knew prisons. He knew the rhythms, noise at dawn, tension at dusk, the constant negotiation of space and respect. He had learned how to keep his head down, how to read a room before it turned dangerous, how to survive. What he didn't know was what happened when survival skills stopped working. The transfer order arrived without warning. No explanation beyond a single phrase stamped across the top of the paperwork: administrative reclassification. He'd laughed when the counselor slid it across the desk. Laughed because he thought it was a bluff. Laughed because he believed the stories about ADX were exaggerated, spread by men who needed a villain to blame for their own unraveling. "You'll regret this," the counselor said, not unkindly. Mercer shrugged. "It's just another prison." That confidence drained from him as the Sally Port closed behind the convoy. Steel doors sealed with a finality that felt personal. The sound echoed, not loud, but absolute. Inside, the air was cooler, cleaner, and wrong. It smelled like nothing. No sweat. No food. No human presence lingering in the corners. An officer escorted him down a corridor that seemed to stretch and fold back on itself. Mercer noticed the absence of windows first. Then the cameras. Then the way the officer never walked beside him, always a half step behind and to the side, as if Mercer were something that might shift without warning. They stopped at a door that didn't look like a door. It was a slab, seamless except for a slot and a thick rectangle of glass set too high to see through comfortably. "Step inside," the officer said. The cell was smaller than Mercer expected and larger than he feared. Concrete bed. Concrete desk. Concrete stool molded from the floor. The toilet was stainless steel, polished to a dull shine. A narrow window cut into the wall angled toward the sky, offering light without view. Everything had been designed to remove choice. The door closed. The lock engaged. The sound was softer than Mercer imagined, a muted click that carried more weight than a slam ever could. He stood there, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed without markers. No announcement. No movement outside the door. Meals arrived through the slot, precise and silent. Mercer ate because he understood routine was oxygen. He counted breaths. He counted steps. He counted the faint buzz of the lights until it settled into his bones. When sleep came, it was thin and shallow. The first check-in happened on day 3, though Mercer wouldn't learn the number until later. A voice crackled through a speaker he hadn't noticed before, asking questions in a tone stripped of curiosity. "Number. Status. Any issues?" "I want to appeal," Mercer said. "This transfer, there's been a mistake." There was a pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. "You can submit a request," the voice replied. "Forms will be provided." "When?" "Pending availability." The line went dead. Mercer began to understand the difference between isolation and disappearance. Isolation was being alone. Disappearance was being present without impact. His requests went unanswered. His forms returned with boxes checked and no notes. Time expanded and contracted in ways that made memory unreliable. He spoke to himself to keep his voice from rusting. The worst part wasn't the quiet. It was the predictability. The knowledge that tomorrow would look exactly like today, and that this sameness could stretch indefinitely. On what he believed was the 7th day, Mercer heard something new. Not voices. Not footsteps. A vibration. Low and distant, like machinery working far away. He pressed his ear to the door, searching for proof that other people existed beyond the concrete. Later, during the single hour allotted for recreation, Mercer was escorted to a different room, another concrete box with a grate overhead that revealed a slice of sky. The sun hit his face with a force that surprised him. He closed his eyes and breathed, pretending the warmth was freedom. That was when he saw it. Scratched into the wall, faint but deliberate, were lines. Tallies. Hundreds of them. Some clustered. Some spaced apart. Some crossed through with angry slashes. At the bottom, carved deeper than the rest, were words written with a patience that suggested long planning. As to come here, Mercer felt his stomach drop. Back in his cell, the words followed him. He replayed every moment that had led to the transfer. The argument with another inmate. The grievance he'd filed. The comment he'd made during a classification review, insisting he could handle anything they threw at him. He had believed control meant resilience. The next check-in came sooner. The voice asked the same questions. Mercer answered differently. "I need to talk to someone," he said. "This place, something's wrong." Another pause. "Define wrong," the voice replied. Mercer searched for the right words and found none. How do you explain that the walls were doing their job too well? That the absence of chaos had become a threat? That he could feel himself changing in ways that scared him more than any fight ever had? "I made a mistake," Mercer said finally. The speaker clicked off. That night, Mercer dreamed of doors. Not opening, not closing, just existing, endless and identical. He woke with his heart racing and the certainty that the transfer hadn't been punishment. It had been selection. The realization came with a second, colder thought. If ADX Florence was designed for men who couldn't be controlled anywhere else, then someone believed Mercer belonged here. And when the next meal slid through the slot accompanied by a folded piece of paper, no letterhead, no explanation, just a number circled in red, Mercer understood the true cost of the transfer. It wasn't the isolation. It was the knowledge that regret had arrived too late to matter. Because the number wasn't a date. It was a duration. And it had no end. The number circled in red stayed with Mercer long after the paper disappeared through the slot. He tried to calculate it into something manageable, days, weeks, months, but it refused to settle. It wasn't formatted like a sentence. It was formatted like a system. In ADX Florence, systems were the only things that moved. The routine never changed, but Mercer did. His thoughts began to arrive out of order, stacking on top of one another until even simple decisions felt heavy. He spoke aloud more often now, narrating actions so they didn't dissolve before he finished them. Breathe. The walls gave nothing back. They didn't echo. They absorbed. On what he estimated was day 12, a different voice came through the speaker, calmer, older. It introduced itself as Dr. Halvorsen, Behavioral Health. Mercer straightened, grateful for any variation. "Daniel," the voice said, using his name like a test. "Tell me how you're sleeping." "Not well," Mercer replied. "I need to know why I'm here." Another pause. This one was longer. "You're here because the system assessed risk," Halvorsen said. "Risk isn't only about violence." Mercer laughed once, short and sharp. "I didn't hurt anyone." "That's not the metric," Halvorsen replied. "Control is." The word landed hard. Halvorsen explained ADX in neutral language, as if describing weather patterns. The architecture minimized contact. The schedule minimized unpredictability. The policies minimized influence. In other prisons, inmates learned leverage. Who to talk to, when to push, when to wait. ADX was designed to remove leverage entirely. "You challenged your classification," Halvorsen said. "You filed grievances that didn't violate rules, but they questioned assumptions. That creates noise." "So I got buried," Mercer said. "Buried is emotional language," Halvorsen replied. "Reallocated is more accurate." The line went dead. Mercer began to understand the tallies he'd seen in recreation. They weren't counting time. They were counting adaptation. Each mark was a concession the body made to keep the mind intact. Each slash was a moment the mind failed and had to be reset. In the weeks that followed, Mercer noticed something else. He wasn't alone in the way he thought. The building breathed. Doors opened and closed on a schedule too precise to be random. Water rushed through pipes in intervals. Somewhere, far off, machinery hummed. ADX wasn't silent. It was curated. During recreation, Mercer searched the walls again. New markings had appeared since his first visit. Small, deliberate symbols etched near the grate. Not words. Patterns. A triangle. 3 lines. A circle cut in half. Messages without language. Back in his cell, Mercer tested the limits. He delayed responses during check-ins. He rearranged his cell, moving the stool an inch, the bedding folded differently. The reaction was immediate but subtle. Recreation time shortened by 5 minutes. Meals arrived earlier, then later. The system adjusted him back into alignment. Control wasn't enforced with punishment. It was enforced with calibration. The first incident happened during a routine escort. Mercer was cuffed, guided through a corridor he hadn't seen before. He tried to orient himself by counting turns. Straight. Another right. Then the officer stopped. A door opened. Inside was a room that looked like an office stripped of purpose. Desk bolted to the floor. 2 chairs facing each other. No windows. No camera in sight, at least none obvious. An administrator entered. Civilian clothes. No name offered. "You asked to appeal," the man said. "Yes," Mercer replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I don't belong here." The administrator Saturday, "Everyone here says that." "I mean it," Mercer said. "I can function in lower security. I can follow rules." The administrator leaned forward slightly. "That's precisely the concern." Mercer frowned. "In other facilities, compliance can be social," the man continued. "Men comply because they want something: status, protection, favors. Here, compliance must be intrinsic." "You mean obedient," Mercer said. The administrator smiled. "I mean predictable." Mercer realized then that this wasn't an appeal. It was an evaluation. "What happens if I'm not?" Mercer asked. The administrator stood. "You adapt," he said. "Or the environment adapts you." The meeting ended without paperwork, without signatures. Back in his cell, Mercer noticed the lights dimmed earlier than usual. The test. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling until shapes began to form where there were none. Days blurred. His thoughts looped. Memories arrived uninvited, vivid, and intrusive. He began to forget the sound of his own voice when he wasn't speaking. The window angled toward the sky showed only clouds and glare. No birds. No horizon. The outside world became theoretical. Mercer started to regret not the mistakes that led him to prison, but the confidence that led him here. He'd believed resilience was loud, defiance, endurance, grit. ADX demanded a quieter strength, one he didn't know how to perform. Another folded paper arrived with a meal. This time, it wasn't a number. It was a single sentence, printed in the same clinical font as everything else. Adjustment period ongoing. Mercer pressed his forehead to the door and laughed, then stopped when the sound startled him. He thought of the scratched words in the recreation room. As to come here, he wondered what kind of man would choose this place. The answer came during a rare overlap at recreation. As Mercer stood under the grate, he heard a cough, not from machinery, not from pipes. A human sound. He froze, then listened. Another cough. A shuffle. He spoke quietly, unsure if sound would carry. "You hear?" A voice answered from beyond the wall, hoarse but steady. "Depends who's asking." "Daniel," Mercer said. "How long you been?" The pause. "Longer than the architecture." Mercer swallowed. "Why did you come?" The voice chuckled softly. "Because I couldn't stop organizing people," it said. "Because silence was the only thing left that could contain me." Mercer felt the weight of that settle. ADX wasn't just for the violent. It was for the uncontainable. "What happens next?" Mercer asked. Another pause. "Next is when you decide whether regret owns you," the voice said. or you learn how to survive without becoming smaller. How? You stop measuring time, the voice replied. You measure yourself. The escort arrived. The door opened. The moment vanished. Back in his cell, Mercer sat on the bed and closed his eyes. He focused on breath, on posture, on the narrow space he could still control. He understood now that ADX wasn't meant to break men quickly. It was meant to reshape them slowly, invisibly, until resistance felt inefficient. Somewhere down the corridor, a door clicked. Somewhere else, a system recalibrated. And Mercer realized the most dangerous part of the transfer wasn't the isolation or the regret. It was the possibility that one day soon, the place would stop feeling wrong. Because when that happened, escape wouldn't mean leaving. It would mean remembering who he was before the design worked. And that memory was already starting to fade. The day Mercer stopped counting was the day ADX Florence began to win. He didn't notice it at first. There was no announcement, no internal alarm. One morning he woke and realized he couldn't remember how many meals he'd eaten since the transfer. The number had slipped away like a word on the tip of the tongue. Instead of panic, he felt relief. That frightened him more than anything else. In the supermax, resistance didn't look like riots or refusal. It looked like memory. It looked like holding on to before. Once that weakened, the place did the rest. Mercer's body adapted faster than his mind. Sleep came easier, though it wasn't restful. His movements became economical, precise, almost elegant within the confines of the cell. He learned exactly how much pressure it took to slide the stool without making noise. He learned which thoughts led to spirals and which ones settled him back into equilibrium. He learned how to disappear without leaving. The voice next door returned occasionally, never on a schedule. They spoke in fragments through the concrete, trading observations like contraband. You still regret it? The voice asked one day. Yes, Mercer replied, then corrected himself. I think so. The voice laughed softly. That means you're still you. Mercer wondered how long that would last. The final evaluation came without warning. The door opened, restraints applied, escort silent. Mercer was taken to the same stripped office. The same administrator waited, hands folded, expression neutral. You've adjusted, the man said. Mercer said nothing. We measure compliance differently here, the administrator continued. Behavioral stability. Reduced agitation. Acceptance of routine. You mean resignation, Mercer said. The administrator didn't disagree. Resignation is a form of peace, he said. For some men. Mercer leaned forward. And if I don't want that peace? The administrator studied him for a moment. Then you will always feel like something is missing, he said. That's exhausting. What happens if I stay here long enough? Mercer asked. The administrator stood. You stop asking questions like that. Back in his cell, Mercer noticed a change. The light cycle shifted by minutes. Meals arrived with new packaging. Recreation was postponed, then restored. Subtle tests, gauging reaction. Mercer responded with practiced calm. He understood the rules now. That night, the voice next door spoke again. They'll offer you a choice soon, it said. What kind of choice? Mercer asked. One that sounds like mercy, the voice replied. Lower restrictions. More contact. Somewhere quieter than this, louder than nothing. And the cost? You don't come back the same, the voice said. You carry this place with you. Mercer lay awake after that, staring at the angled window. Clouds drifted past, slow and indifferent. He tried to remember the sound of traffic, of crowds, of laughter that wasn't restrained by walls. The memories felt thin, like photographs left too long in the sun. The choice arrived 2 days later in writing. Conditional transfer under review. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't even relief. It was a test to see if Mercer still wanted to belong to the world outside the system. He pressed his palm against the door and felt the vibration of the building, steady, patient, eternal. ADX Florence didn't rush. It didn't threaten. It waited. Mercer thought of the scratched words in the recreation yard. As to come here, he finally understood them. Not bravado. Not madness. Surrender. If you chose the cage stopped chasing you. Mercer sat on the bed and closed his eyes. He imagined saying yes to the transfer, stepping back into a prison where noise returned, where conflict returned, where choices mattered again. He imagined how loud that would feel after this silence. He imagined how fragile he'd be. When the speaker crackled to life for the final check-in, Mercer answered calmly. "I'm ready," he said. "For the transfer?" the voice asked. "For the consequences," Mercer replied. The line went dead. Days later, maybe weeks, Mercer was moved. The door opened. The restraints clicked. The corridor felt brighter than he remembered. Outside, the air smelled sharp and alive. The convoy carried him away from the concrete silence back toward noise and friction and risk. From the outside, it looked like mercy. But Mercer knew the truth. ADX Florence hadn't punished him. It had edited him. And as the walls disappeared into the distance, he realized the regret hadn't come from being sent to the supermax. It came from understanding exactly why it existed, and how easily it could make a man accept anything as long as the rules were quiet enough. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.